Actually, this lecture was recorded long back, and the PowerPoint slides incorporated into this lecture were actually made when I was Mr. Shaunak Shamatz, the head of the department of Kalipada Ghosh Mahavidyalaya, which is largely known to be Bagdogra College, in the year 2007, when, under my headship, that particular rural frontier college earned its eligibility for offering the honors course in English literature for the same time. I am basically retaining the same slides and the same discussions. We need to know who is Marx when we want to understand Marxism. We need to know what is female, what is woman, what is femininity when we are discussing about or trying to learn about feminism. When we are talking about Imagism, it is required that we understand what an image is. Because what an imagism isn't is available in Wikipedia and history books. But what an image is requires technical mastery over the literary terms. For example, what's the difference between an image and a picture? What's exactly the distinction of image amid several forms of visual representation? What is graphic representation, and is every time we use a graphic representation a case of employment of image? Actually, the word image implies definitely a visual representation, but it has to be particular, singular, concentrated on a single moment in time and space, and a single complex of emotions condensed into it. So if we are having within the same visual representation a differentiation of point of view or perspective, that will definitely be a visual representation, but it will not be an image. Or for example, if there is a flav or extra amount of some layers of visualizations which are abstract and which are access to the precise, to the point representation, which is not pinpoint, which is not concrete, and which is not particularized, but is tending to be abstracted into a generalization, then that wouldn't be an image. So an image implies a unit or echoic visual representation, which will be singular in its focus, specific in its definition and address, concrete in its form, particularized in its scope. And this entity may have an already always complex plurality within it, but that has to be like a zip file or MP3 file, that has to be synced into a singularity, as if the entirety of that visual picture has unique time, which is singular, unique space, which is singular, no difference in perspectives, and no letting loose of pluralities or abstractions, generalizations, or excess information. Then that would be called an image. For example, if you look into this picture, you can see that the image has a very definite and particular scope. In spite of not being naturalist enough, it is singular. For example, you can understand that this is polar region because the space is singularly white and covered in snow, and a part of that snow-clad field or frame seems to be fluid and melting into the unlit part of sky in the horizon at the back, and a snow bear is cozily taking rest. The bear will go away at another time, and there may be a hunter in the same place that will become another image. This image has its particularity in time, in the emotional complex of repose, and space, which is the polar region. No excess information and no explanation. And the visualization does not attract such intellectual complications like what if we see the same object from the back standing somewhere in the back. Now we come to Imagism. In order to understand Imagism, because good teaching and good learning means not giving the background and then not bothering about the particular analysis line by line, but coming from the particular and then transcending towards theory, because theory is already always a significant generalization of particular cases. We will take the particular case by the pioneer of the movement, a two-lined poem in a station of the metro. The poem is given in the pink box. The apparition of these faces, which faces, what type of apparitions, why apparitions, these things are not detailed, and the excess you can see has been trimmed already. In the crowd, in which station, and what type of crowd? Is it a morning crowd or an evening crowd? Is it a crowd of people going to work in a hurry or returning home tired and exhausted? These things are not detailed. You still get the image. And if you are thinking that the next line is that of another image, you are mistaken, because it's even if and even though, not using any conjunction or disjunction to connect the two phrases, is a phrasal continuity of the same information without losing its uniqueness and singularity. Petals on a wet black bough. So black bough must be something which is darkened by a storm and spells of rain and petals scattered all around. This is the same image as the apparition of unknown citizens' faces in the crowd. If you are wondering how come it's not two images, that one of human domain and one of the floral domain, or let's say one that is of the petals in the natural domain of climate and trees, then you need to look into a typical metro station where you cannot actually distinguish, and that is also not the purpose of the focalizer of the poet. The different faces, they merge somehow in a scattered diffusion of same type of creatures: zombies, apparitions, ghosts. Not particular individuals, but the crowd is the subject of the image. And if you see at the bottom, honestly tell me, do these petals scattered on a wet black branch of tree after the stormy spell of showers from the sky, do they look at all to be a different image, or are these two images, two the reader of the poem will come condensed in the same visualization. If you are still not very sure that these two lines are giving you the same compacted, synchronized, conjoined, singular image, look into. Let me tell you, this is the original picture. I have just put some basic editing here without deleting anything, without adding anything. So this is Imagism. If there is at all a plurality of things to be addressed, a comparison and contrast to be made, for example, between two things, they must be merged together in the same visual moment, particularity, singularity, uniqueness, and instantiation. The beginning of Imagism. Now let's come to the mechanical part of any teaching, definitely in the hands not of Ezra Pound, but in the hands of T.E. Hume, who somewhere in the very first decade of the 20th century proposed at a gathering at Poets Club in London that contemporary poets should write poetry based on absolutely accurate presentation of its subject with no excess verbiage. This was the first statement of things we can associate with Imagism. And then comes the pioneering break. Ezra Pound in 1912, which means 4 years after the first initiation by the first hypothetical suggestion by T. Hume in London, Ezra Pound reads a poem written by a girl called Hilda, signs it H.D. Imagist, which means H.D. the Imagist, and sends it to Harriet Monroe at Poetry. And Pound becomes the captain of this movement. Pound in 1910 presented part of this poetics that we associate with Imagism. He said that poetry is a sort of inspired mathematics. Just like in mathematics, we have no scope of no extra circumambulation of phrases and circumlocution. We do not have any scope of being not precise. We do not have the scope of being not exact in mathematics. Similarly, poetry shouldn't give us the scope of not being exact in mathematics. For example, 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. In poetry also, it should give that kind of crispness if it is suggesting that two friends and two friends will merge into a gathering or unity of 4 friends. For this statement, it must be as crisp and as brief and as exact as the mathematical formula 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. No abstracts, just giving us equations for the human situation, especially human emotions. Pound defined the image in the way that we understand Imagism to be. An image is that which presents an intellectual and emotional complex in an instant of time. A singular instantiation is the criterion of any visual detail being considered as an image. If it cannot be condensed in an instant of time. It may be a film, it may be a good painting, but it is not an image. And if there is plurality, as I have said previously, if there are fragments in it, or if there are comparisons between two or more things, they have to be condensed and compacted into a singular visual case in point. Let's look into some high points or milestones of the history of the Imagist movement. The Imagist anthology was published in 1914. In this anthology, the main poets who were included were William Carlos Williams, Richard Eldington, and James Joyce, who was definitely not a hardcore Imagist, but if you read his novels, you will understand that he is experimenting with many suitable forms for the conduction of what he wants to utter, and image is one of them. For example, the epiphany that we associate with the bird girl or wedding girl in a portrait of the artist as a young man is actually an image of a girl at an instance of time, space, and emotion. HD definitely was there, and Pound was the captain. Other images who were included were Flint, Lawrence, and Goldfletcher. By the time the anthology appeared, Emil Lowell had effectively appropriated Imagism and was seen as the movement's leader. But 3 years from that day, even Emil Lowell, the leader, thought that the movement had run its course. Pound by then was claiming that he invented Imagism to launch HT's career. Wonderful artist as an individual, but these accidents are good for film and gossip, not for understanding the structure and function of the artistic movement. I'm just joking. The first tenet of the Imagist manifesto was to use ordinary common speech, but not ordinary common speech in the confused, scattered, and sometimes not so economic way in which we communicate and we utter things in real life, but to use the vocabulary, the phrase of common speech, but to employ or use it in the particular, exact, concrete way, not in the approximation, not as a proxy, and never with ornamentation. Because clarity of expression is what the precise visual images look for. If it doesn't have a clarity of expression, it is not an image. There may be a gamut of explanation, gamut of excess decoration, gamut of generalization, abstract and complications of point of view, but that is not an image. To be an image, a visual representation has to be full of clarity of expression. And definitely Imagism would be against the flabby decorations, no superfluous word, no adjective unnecessarily used, and of course trying to avoid all sorts of possible abstractions. The Imagist poetry aimed to replace murky abstractions with accuracy of perceived detail. The metaphors must be like mathematics, very apt, not almost suitable, but exact. And the economy of language must be retained with respect. Pound defined the image, I repeat, that which presents an intellectual and emotional complex in an instant of time. You can see we are looking into the same landscape. While the photographer was probably going somewhere, he saw this branch of tree which was almost dead. গলির মোড়ে একটা গাছ দাঁড়িয়ে, গাছ নয় গাছের প্রেতচ্ছায়া, perfectly an image. And an elephant coming to drink from these arid regions into this small brook. Maybe after some weeks, due to nature's own playful ferocities, the river had changed its course. নদী সরে গেছে, গাছ মরে গেছে. It's no longer the same image, although by latitude and longitude you will claim this is the same landscape object that we are seeing, but these two are different images. This is one image and this is another image. So that's the value of the word instant of time. And the image should let us see directly, immediately, without mediation of any subjective bias and without the conundrum of points of view. How will the sound of Imagist poetry be? The practitioners insisted that it will be like free verse, where the musical phrase will be used in a sequence and not the beat. The beat is an artificial limitation upon the natural rhythm or flow of the phrase. So what exactly is a metronome? Today we will claim that a metronome is something like 100 beats per second. Or maybe you will show me an instrument saying that this is metronome. But the sense in which this word was used by the pioneers of Imagism was, as opposed to tempo, the beat. The sequence of the musical phrase is the natural, spontaneous tempo that even a free verse can have. And the metronome is the artificial, very strict, routinized beat structure. The poem must not be a kind of shackled and limited utterance under the supervision of beats, but it should be unfolding in the natural tempo, almost like a free verse. Let's see some examples. Have a very good look into the edited picture that I have used as the background. A girl with a net and also a fish caught in the fish net. This poem is by Hilda Doolittle, but because in Imagist poetry the gender of the point of view and even the point of view itself wouldn't matter, because we are looking into the concrete visual instance and not into the complications of identity of the point of view. Therefore, we needn't have an imagination or understanding of any male figure here, that the speaker is a female, so there is no necessity to assume that it is being addressed to a man. Are you alive? I touch you. So this is an instance of time, and at that instance of time you quiver like a sea fish, and immediately I cover you with my net. What are you, panted one? Another example by Hilda Doolittle. Whirl up, sea, whirl your pointed pines, splash your great pines on our rocks, hurl your green over us, cover us with your pools of fur. You see, this is about one particular image of very ferocious, conically pointed waves in the sea. Have a very good look on the pines and this wave, the same image. Amy Lowell, to my opinion, the title she had used for a 1914 collection of her poems, Sword, Blades, and Poppy Seed, is an Imagist title itself. The reason is very clear. Look into this sword blade and look into this poppy seed. Amy Lowell insisted that poems must be pictorial, and this is what I was trying to say in the warning or caution at the beginning, that of course it is pictorial, but what form of pictorial representation is an image? All forms of pictorial poems will not be Imagist poem. It has to be exact and it has to be concrete, it has to be singular. Only then that pictorial representation will be an image, and that pictorial poem will be Imagist. And Amy Lowell insisted on polyphonic prose. The meaning of polyphonic prose is something like a kind of many voices trying to interlock and interface each other, instead of the usual lyric speaker who is very singular. Why polyphonic prose is insisted by Amy Lowell? Number one, to do away with the usual prosody of poetry, because if the prose is polyphonic, it is no longer artificially symphonic lyric. And secondly, for the dialogic potential of a single utterance. Actually, you see, an image doesn't take into account the intention of the author. It's completely out there as a concrete image only. No flabby control or excess. অথরের ইন্টেনশনের কোনো মেদ পুঞ্জীভূত হয়নি, চর্বি জমেনি তাতে অথরের মনোপলির. So it's not important to have monologic or monologue-like control of the lyric speaker. That's why also the insistence on polyphonic prose. See the poem Generations. You are like the stem of a young beech tree, straight and swaying, breaking out in golden leaves. Reads like haiku, doesn't it? Your walk is like the blowing of a beech tree on a hill.